Tonight, horror in Johannesburg. Dozens killed in an overnight inferno.
I jumped down, my wife stole for me a baby, I catch him.
Terrifying stories of escaping the flames. What we've learned about those trapped inside. BC's Premier sends a message to the Bank of Canada. Stop raising interest rates.
I'm hearing from British Columbians every day that are being crushed by the costs of daily life.
And battered by Hurricane Idalia, Florida begins to assess the damage left behind.
It looks like a war zone.
This is The National with Ian Henemansing.
Many in South Africa are in mourning after fire tore through a building in central Johannesburg. At least 74 people are dead. Some of the victims burned beyond recognition. It's believed that hundreds called this derelict building home, many impoverished, vulnerable, and once the fire began, trapped. The sudden tragedy leaving some first responders and onlookers shaken, and survivors in anguish. Chris Brown has the aftermath, including some images that you may find disturbing, as well as the conditions that made this fire so deadly for so many.
Amid terrible poverty, there is now immense loss and grief. All day, the bodies of the dead, including at least a dozen children, were pulled from the decrepit 5-story building. It went up in flames overnight. This informal settlement in central Johannesburg was a home of last resort for people with little hope and not much else. Residents told stories of suffocating by smoke as they pushed against doors blocked by garbage that would not open.
The actual fire escape was closed, so there was a lot of people, a lot of people smoke, people suffocated, a lot of people died because of the smoke.
The whole building, it was fired. We don't know how it started. Yeah, I jumped down, my wife stole for me a baby, I catch him.
South Africa's president visited the scene and called the fire one of the worst ever in his country, a great tragedy.
And this is the type of death that we never wish on anyone.
Investigators say they believe the flames started on the ground floor.
I have got about 23 years in the service. I've never come across something like this in my whole life.
The building had a dark past. During apartheid, it's where black South Africans came to get passes that allowed them to work in white areas of the city. The city owned the property, but officials say criminal gangs had taken control of it, known as hijacking, and made migrants and the homeless pay to stay there.
We will do our best to ensure that we act diligently in investigating the fire and equally in our pursuit to reclaim the hijacked and illegally occupied buildings in the city.
The fire has cast a harsh light on Johannesburg's extreme inequality and desperation, and a housing crisis that has left up to 15,000 people homeless.
And Chris, this isn't the only building the South African authorities believe was hijacked by criminal gangs.
Ian, there are dozens of such buildings abandoned as inner-city economic conditions deteriorated in Johannesburg and then businesses moved out to the suburbs. One advocacy group said they know of 57 such buildings where gangs or cartels are active. In many cases, homeless people there are just told to pay up or move out, and it's usually too dangerous for city inspectors to go in and clear the building without having a huge police operation behind them. South Africa's president on that visit today said it's a wake-up call to the problem of homelessness, but he did not elaborate on what he plans to do. Ian.
Chris Brown reporting from London. Let's turn now to the wildfires burning in this country. British Columbia is extending its provincial state of emergency by 2 weeks, citing an elevated risk of new or worsening fires.
The northeastern regions are expected to continue to see unseasonably warm temperatures, smoke, and strong winds. This has led to previously in-control fires becoming out of control again.
More than 400 wildfires are currently burning across the province, and more than 4,000 people are still under evacuation orders. Along with the heat, much of the province is facing a severe drought, residents being told to conserve water. And BC's Premier is sending a message to the Bank of Canada tonight. He's calling directly on the governor to stop interest rate hikes, saying people are already stretched. Marina von Stackelberg now with why a premier is taking the unusual step of criticizing the central bank.
BC's premier says it's disturbing. The Bank of Canada is seriously considering hiking interest rates again.
Now, I'm hearing from British Columbians every day that are being crushed by the costs of daily life. And one of those big impacts that they're seeing is ever escalating interest rates.
David Eby has sent a letter to the governor of the Bank of Canada asking him to stop the hikes, writing, "The increased financial strain, poverty, and homelessness will lead to significant economic and social damage to our province and the country that will take years to repair."
Statistics Canada is saying that the biggest driver of inflation in our country right now is rising mortgage rates.
Eby also says desperately needed housing projects are being put on hold because the cost of borrowing money to build them keeps going up. 10 rate hikes over the last year and a half as the central bank tries to cool inflation.
The interest rates for young people having to mortgage, my nephew, $500 more a month. He was already struggling. So, yeah, I think it's a tough time for many people.
The decision makers, they are make the common people life harder by increasing the rates. I know economy needs that, but still there should be another way.
Some economists also say the hikes need to be halted.
Bank of Canada has gone too far and too fast with the interest rate increases and doesn't seem to be taking into account the impact on individual financial circumstances in doing so.
I don't think we have a need to increase them as yet. I think it'd be prudent to kind of hold off.
No politician can tell the Bank of Canada what to do. It's independent, and it won't comment on Eby's letter because of the timing. The bank's decision on whether or not to increase interest rates comes next week. Marina von Stackelberg, CBC News, Ottawa.
Ontario's housing minister remains on the job despite a report released yesterday that found he broke ethics rules. And that's the second report detailing how developers with access to his chief of staff got the green light to build on environmentally protected land. As Ithil Musa shows us, the government appears determined to apologize, but then move on.
Going to begin by
he said it over and over again.
I accept responsibility. I remain committed. I accept responsibility. I take responsibility.
But when asked the one question on everyone's mind, Steve Clark deflected.
We want to instill that trust back into Ontarians, but I accept.
Why don't you resign today, Minister?
Clark admitted there were clear flaws in his government's decision to remove lands from a protected area in Ontario known as the Greenbelt, and that as housing minister, he should have known and done more. Still, he refused to step down.
I want to make it very clear to Ontarians that I'm sorry that we didn't do a better job and that I personally didn't do a better job.
This comes just a day after a report by the Integrity Commissioner found that Clark's failure to properly oversee the process of removing Greenbelt land for housing development created an opportunity for some developers to further their private interests and broke ethics rules. It echoes the Auditor General's report released just weeks ago that revealed well-connected developers who heavily influenced the government now stand to make billions.
What he did was wrong. What he did was fail the people of Ontario. He failed this legislature. And he should have stepped down today.
You know, I could go on and on about it.
But the Premier says Clark will stay.
Yes, there has been bumps in the road. But people are going to thank us years down the road for building the attainable, the affordable, nonprofit homes that we're going to be doing and regular homes.
Ontario's Integrity Commissioner has recommended Clark be reprimanded. And one expert says,
ministerial resignation is the textbook accountability of a minister for mismanaging a file such as this. I think the minister himself is ultimately accountable directly to the Premier.
I have confidence in Minister Clark.
But Premier Ford says he's moving forward on building more homes in Ontario and says Clark will be by his side in his role as housing minister.
Ithil, the housing minister has refused to step down, so what happens next?
Well, let's not forget, Ian, the RCMP is looking into this to see whether it merits a criminal investigation. And just behind me in a few weeks, the Ontario legislature will sit. And there's no doubt that one of the first orders of business will be the Integrity Commissioner's report, meaning this issue will not be going away anytime soon.
Ithel Musa outside Queen's Park in Toronto. CBC News has learned police in Calgary are looking into 2 sudden deaths to see if there are ties to Kenneth Law. Law is the Ontario man who's accused of selling a potentially lethal substance used by people to take their own lives. He's already facing 14 charges in Ontario for counseling and aiding suicide. Internationally, he's been linked to more than 100 deaths in multiple countries. Once a powerful Hurricane Idalia has now moved over the Atlantic Ocean, but the damage has been done, billions of dollars worth. And as Chris Reyes shows us, some are just now finding out if their homes are still standing.
From the air, a clear view of Idalia's wreckage. Severe flooding in North Carolina. In Florida, homes destroyed, neighborhoods submerged.
It's not great.
And from the ground, an even closer look at the aftermath. This is Cedar Key, a community of about 700 people off Florida's northwest coast.
All of the businesses are gone. There's not one commercial establishment that I think will be able to reopen anytime soon. There are buildings where entire walls that were facing the Gulf are just gone. It looks like a war zone.
Oh my God.
Cedar Key resident Michael Presley Bobbitt captured it all when Idalia made landfall.
That building on the end down there is going to come apart.
As a Category 3 hurricane on Wednesday morning.
Looked like the Gulf was angry, like it was just swallowing us up.
After battering Florida, Idalia dumped heavy rains on Georgia and the Carolinas on its way to the Atlantic Ocean, creating dangerous conditions. A deadly tree fall, a storm surge reaching nearly 3 meters, and a storm-spawned tornado. The passengers of this car narrowly escaping death.
To the people of Florida and throughout the Southeast, I'm here to make clear that our nation has your back.
Among the biggest challenges now, restoring power to hundreds of thousands of residents and businesses across 4 states. And of course, the costly cleanup. Early estimates for Idalia's price tag pegged between 10 to 20 billion US dollars.
So far in 2023, the United States has been impacted by 15 separate weather or climate disasters that cost $1 billion or more each. In the 1980s, we used to have these billion-dollar disasters once every 3 months. Now it's closer to once every 3 weeks.
A troubling trend with this year's Atlantic hurricane season far from over. Chris Reyes, CBC News, New York.
Donald Trump is set to skip a court hearing next week after pleading not guilty in the Georgia election interference case. In new court filings today, Trump waived his right to appear in person. Trump and 18 others are accused of attempting to overturn the 2020 presidential results in that state. Last week, he became the first former U.S. president to have a mugshot taken after surrendering at the Fulton County Jail. Trump is facing 3 other criminal cases. A former leader of the Proud Boys extremist group has been sentenced to 17 years in prison for his role in the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. The government says Joseph Biggs was an instigator of the riot and attempted to stop the certification of Joe Biden's presidential victory. Staggering new numbers out this week show the scale of the overdose crisis unfolding in British Columbia. BC's Coroner Service says more than 1,400 people have died from toxic drugs from January to July. That is the most ever on record for the first 7 months of the year. And it underscores the magnitude of the epidemic. Lindsay Duncombe shows us how some are trying to end the stigma on this International Overdose Awareness Day.
Open up your eye for me. I need you to open your eye. Wake up.
This is how Christina Selby Brown processes grief, teaching people how to reverse an overdose with the drug naloxone. Her father and brother died after using toxic drugs.
I believe there's a collective grief. It's very complicated, so I believe that people collectively, because of that collective grief, are just basically wanting to do what they can.
Sasha Bosovic-Illick lives in downtown Vancouver and sees people struggling every day. She's here to learn how to help them.
As an individual, I've had to call 911 a couple of times, seeing people on the streets, and it's been really difficult for me because I don't actually know when to intervene.
Across British Columbia on this Overdose Awareness Day, people gathered to remember the dead. On average, 6 people die here every day because of toxic drugs, the epicenter of a crisis that is increasingly national. There were moments of mourning today on the prairies. the Maritimes, the nation's capital.
I was using in my own home and I overdosed. And luckily I pulled out. I don't know how long I was out. I have no knowledge of any of that, but I survived.
The overarching question, how to stop the death. This year, BC decriminalized small amounts of hard drugs to reduce stigma and is allowing some safe supply, prescription opioids, so people won't use unregulated and often deadly street drugs. Policies that have been simultaneously criticized for not going far enough and for making the problem worse.
It's probably one of the most complicated problems that government is dealing with, our government, any government across the country.
The BC government says more than 1,000 lives were saved last year because of naloxone. Organizers are planning for a bigger event like this next year, a sign no one expects the need to save lives to go away anytime soon. Lindsay Duncombe, CBC News, New Westminster.
Conservative MP Michael Chong will appear before a committee of U.S. lawmakers looking into foreign interference. Chong says he was targeted by China because he publicly criticized its treatment of Uyghurs. The RCMP opened an investigation into his case, and the federal government expelled a Chinese diplomat over allegations he tried to intimidate Chong. The MP has accepted an invitation to testify on Capitol Hill in September. There are new worrying signs tonight of China's economic slowdown. Manufacturing is declining, and a major property developer is on the brink of collapse. As Nisha Patel explains, it's a poor forecast that could have ripple effects here at home.
In the northern Chinese city of Tianjin, construction of these apartment buildings has stalled. They haven't paid us since January, this worker says. His employer is a major Chinese property developer. It's scrambling to avoid default as home sales plummet.
You have a property sector correction that is still ongoing. There's a lot of bad debt that's been granted, so balance sheets are not looking great.
Real estate turmoil isn't the only sign of China's economic stress. Manufacturing is slowing. Exports are tumbling. Youth unemployment is so high, the government has stopped publishing the data.
The idea that there's something that authorities are trying to mask or to hide certainly is not reassuring, and it sets certainly a very bad precedent.
Foreign investors are increasingly wary of the risks of doing business with China. Some of Canada's biggest pension funds have either limited or paused investments entirely. Forecasts point to a new era of slower growth as China also wrestles with issues like an aging population.
China has a debt problem. It's having demographic declines. It also has a lot of zombie companies.
There are fresh efforts to boost confidence and revive the economy. Big cities have relaxed restrictions on home buying. China's central bank is cutting interest rates, but there are calls for Beijing to take more aggressive action.
The problem is, how much effect these policy adjustments will have. Households seem less sensitive towards those policy easing.
While a slowdown in China could drag commodity prices lower, there may be one silver lining. Falling prices there mean cheaper imports for Canada and could help to ease inflation here at home. Nisha Patel, CBC News, Toronto.
There are fears new regulations will make supplements more expensive.
I'm a little bit worried that Health Canada is missing the mark.
Why Health Canada says the move is necessary. Manitoba nearly scraps the road test for some to get a license.
I don't think it's smart.
And no bull here, this cow rides shotgun.
What we ran into was a big surprise, I guess you could say.
We're back into more than 3,700 grocery store workers in Toronto have ratified a new deal with Metro, ending a month-long strike that closed down dozens of locations. The new deal includes an immediate raise of $1.50 per hour, and within months that increase will jump to $2 per hour for some workers. Backlash is growing tonight over new regulations for natural health products. The concern is these new rules will drive up prices. And CBC News has learned the opposition wants to do something about it. Olivia Stefanovich looks at the debate that has Health Canada on the defensive.
Supplements, which is,
In Wajia Qureshi's natural health store, she worries everything from supplements to apple cider vinegar and green tea could be threatened by new Health Canada regulations.
the prices will go high, and many of the products people will be unable to buy.
The conservative health critic says the changes are the #1 concern he's hearing from the public.
It's a financial issue, it's an issue about self-choice, it's an issue about freedom of choice.
Health Canada now has the ability to immediately recall any natural health product and force producers to update their labeling. But the most contentious change is still to come. Health Canada wants to charge producers the cost of monitoring and approvals, fees that range from hundreds to tens of thousands of dollars.
I'm a little bit worried that Health Canada is missing the mark.
Opposition parties plan to hold parliamentary hearings about the changes and summon Health Canada officials to testify.
And we should not hesitate to tell Health Canada to go back to the drawing board.
No one from the Liberal government was made available to speak to CBC News. The Health Minister's office deferred to Canada's chief medical advisor.
There's been a lot of misinformation, disinformation out there.
She says the changes ensure natural health products are not making false claims about what they treat or cure, and the cost will be much less than what Health Canada charges Big Pharma.
There is no intention by Health Canada to stop the sale of, restrict access of, or to ban any natural health products.
Health Canada is reviewing thousands of comments from public consultation before charging the $5 billion industry the cost of being regulated. Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News, Ottawa.
In Manitoba, they're slamming the brakes on an unusual plan. Some new drivers were going to be able to get their license without taking a road test. But as Cameron McIntosh tells us, late today, there was a change in course.
Just one of those ideas that had people saying, what? Like Cass Adams, 18, no license yet.
I mean, I would be super excited too if I was the one that didn't have to do my road test. Like, I'd be like, score, look at that. Because, I mean, it's nerve-wracking.
Jokes aside, she doesn't think getting one without a road test is a good idea. Ditto her sister.
No, I think it's dangerous.
MPI is Manitoba's crown-owned auto regulator and insurance company. On Monday, 1,700 workers went on strike, including road test evaluators. 2,000 tests were canceled this week, adding to a backlog that's grown since the pandemic. So, MPI said it would change policies to allow driver's ed graduates with a clean record and a learner's permit for 9 months to apply for a license without a test.
I make no apology for the contingency plans that MPI has put in place.
That's the head of MPI, defending the idea. Note the time, 2 p.m.
MPI is confident that the successful completion of the driver's ed program, including, as I said, the in-vehicle evaluation components, are equivalent to the provincial road test.
Turns out Manitoba law is pretty clear about there needing to be a road test. Manitoba's Conservative government said it was reviewing the plan. Something happened. By 5 p.m., MPI said it was pausing the idea. Well before then, many were questioning its reasoning. Driving instructor Dilly Sapkota says yes, the driver's ed program is solid, but
all people that take a driver's ed, they are not fully qualified to get a license without testing. And if we do that, we are putting more risk on our road.
MPI still insists that it has the legal authority to waive tests and says it may still do so if the strike drags on, notwithstanding the optics of widely being seen to put expediency ahead of safety. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
BC is grappling with an alarming number of toxic drug deaths, and it's certainly not the only place.
They're decriminalizing all hard drugs.
Don't do it!
We revisit Portland to see how decriminalization is playing out on the streets.
When they see me, they feel hope, because they be like, if she can do it, I can do it.
And international students set their sights on Canada.
My visa letter, that visa is granted.
Why many are being exploited before they even get here.
How dare you squeeze the hopes and dreams of a young person into your bottom line?
The National takes you deeper into the stories shaping our world. next. Tonight, we're looking behind the numbers as BC's deadly toll from drug use reaches a new height. More than 1,400 lives lost in just 7 months. The province adopted measures this year to address part of the problem, like decriminalizing small amounts of some illicit drugs. The state of Oregon tried that 2 years earlier. Lindsay Duncombe went there to see how things were going.
This is Portland, Oregon, 2 years after decriminalizing personal amounts of hard drugs. The open drug use, the deaths, worse than ever.
Where are we here now?
This is Skidmore Fountain, which has been called Fentanyl Fountain by some of the folks that we've interacted with.
Police officer David Eby patrols downtown. Measure 110, the ballot initiative that brought in decriminalization, changed his job.
See this guy right here?
Yeah.
Yeah, watch this.
What's he doing?
He's probably smoking fentanyl. See that?
Yeah.
And we're like, we're in what's basically a police car. It's unmarked, but like, we're pretty obviously the police. Hi there, put that knife away, please. What are you smoking?
Betty.
Okay, just powder fentanyl?
Yeah.
Is that what you drop right there?
Yeah.
Right there?
Yeah.
Can you pick that up so someone else doesn't find it or a kid doesn't find that, please?
Under Measure 110, Bayer writes a $100 ticket. The fine will be waived if this man phones a treatment hotline.
Hey, man. No, number to call in the back for treatment. Right on. Good luck to you.
Do you think he'll call?
Most likely, yeah. About a 50-50 shot, yeah.
A recent audit found just 1% of people receiving tickets have actually called the hotline.
All right, got Narcan on one. Hey, we gotta go. Hey. My partner's calling me, asking for Narcan.
Okay. And that means
Someone's overdosing. Yeah, you saw ask for it on the radio.
how often does this happen?
Every day.
But still, 2 people a day die from drug overdoses in Oregon. British Columbia's death toll is 3 times that. Decriminalization hasn't brought those numbers down.
Chase, wake up, buddy. There you go. Thanks.
Now I can say we used it.
He's gotten Narcan 4 milligrams in the left nostril.
In the first year, opioid overdose deaths rose 52%.
When did you guys last deal with him?
Yesterday.
Do you guys Narcan him?
Yes.
Okay. He's up and off. It's very likely we see him again.
Sad.
Yeah. Yep. And I've known that guy for 3 years, and I've frankly seen his decline because he used to just use meth, and now every day he's out here using fentanyl, and this is the second day in a row we've Narcaned him. We're blocking traffic. Let's get on. Let's get moving here.
A few blocks away, another patrol. Anisha Cochran-Dumas is a recovering addict and peer counselor.
That's a large.
She believes Measure 110 will save lives eventually.
Before, we couldn't afford to come and meet them where they are. Like, hey, we know you using, but we still want to give you something of value to make it through this day.
Everything she's handing out was purchased thanks to Measure 110.
Do you want some panties?
Money from cannabis sales goes to groups serving people with addiction.
And I feel like these people are me because I used to be out here too. This is the park where I used to get high in, you know what I'm saying? And when I come through here and they see me, they know I used to get high here because they used to get high with me. So when they see me, they feel hope. Because they be like, if she can do it, I could do it.
She says getting clean takes time. Paul Stromer tried for decades. He's 9 months sober.
It's all about the individual, I mean, and what they want for themselves. When it comes down to addicts, you can't force them to get clean. They gotta want to do it themselves.
But in Portland's downtown, patience is wearing thin. Paul Watts owns a graffiti cleaning business.
I have the Canadian National News with me.
Oh, hi.
Hey guys, they're decriminalizing all hard drugs.
Don't do it.
Yeah, how come?
What do you think?
You tell me.
It enforces, it encourages them to do more.
Yeah, are you seeing that happen here?
Seeing it.
Yeah.
It's exploded.
Has it, eh?
And it's gotten cheaper.
Police see increased demand, increased supply, and Bayer says that could happen in British Columbia too.
We've talked to folks last week that say they're buying it for $1 a pill, or they're trading aluminum cans, which are worth 10 cents in Oregon.
Aluminum cans.
I had a guy last week be like, oh yeah, like these guys that I buy my drugs from will take cans in exchange for drugs.
That's cheap.
It's extremely cheap, yeah.
When Lindsay Duncombe first brought us that story, she explained why that wasn't necessarily a glimpse of BC's future under decriminalization. For one thing, Oregon's law came into effect at the start of the pandemic, just as toxic fentanyl flooded the U.S. Some argue the state's epidemic could have been worse without decriminalization. BC also has some services that Oregon lacks, like supervised injection sites. And the province has pledged $1 billion for mental health and addiction services. But here is the agonizing reality. BC's still on track to have its deadliest year in toxic drug-related deaths, despite all the measures the province has put in place. Lisa Lapointe is BC's chief coroner. She's in Victoria. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me, Ian. Appreciate it.
When it comes to drug deaths in BC, I think a lot of people picture the downtown east side. In reality, where are the deaths occurring and who's dying?
Certainly the downtown east side is the image that most people see, but what our data shows us for 2022 and 4 years previously, in fact, less than 14% of the deaths in our province happen in the downtown east side. And although that is a vulnerable community, more than 86% of the deaths that occur happen in neighborhoods across the province. There's no area of the province untouched by this crisis, and most people are dying in their private residences alone.
I know as chief coroner, you have studied this a lot. You want to see the number of deaths be reduced. So let me ask you directly, what's it going to take in British Columbia to turn this around?
Well, we've held 2 death review panels into this crisis, and the subject matter experts of our panels have told us loud and clear that the distribution of safer supply is imperative to reduce the death. People are reliant on a toxic, unregulated market that is volatile. The black market for drugs is profit-driven, and people are dying because the drugs that they take are not safe. So safer supply is a means of exchanging the toxic drug supply for a prescribed drug. Currently, it's only a prescriber model that people who are dependent on drugs can use to maintain their safety and help to support them to wellness.
You know, there's some people for ideological or political reasons are very reluctant to support the idea of safer drugs being distributed. And they say what we really need is easier, quicker access to drug rehab and mental health support. What would you say to them?
Yes, absolutely. So what our death review panels have said, this is not an either or. This is a continuum of care. So safer supply is essential to keep people alive. There are over 100,000 people in our province with substance use disorder. Yes, treatment, absolutely, when and where people need it. But people who, frankly, dead people can't access treatment. So safer supply will keep people alive until we can stand up enough treatment for, imagine, 100,000 people. And we also need to know that the treatment is evidence-based. Right now, there are no standards for treatment and recovery, nor are there any regulations for reporting. So we actually don't know which treatment and recovery services are most effective, and that's a big gap.
Well, as this crisis continues, I know we'll speak again about it, and we really appreciate you joining us this evening. Lisa Lapointe is BC's chief coroner. Thank you. Thousands of international students are starting to head to class, but their studies could be the least of their worries.
The system has been set up with enough wide gaps between them that people are falling through.
We're looking at the scams facing Indian students in Canada. Next. International students are being thrust into the spotlight as university and college campuses gear up for a new school year. The federal government, under fire for a housing crisis, now talks about a possible limit on the number of foreign students allowed in.
There's an abuse in the system, and
we have to address this in a smart way. It includes potentially looking at a cap.
Canada's housing minister took pains to say those students aren't a significant cause of the housing crisis. Still, that's the only limit the government has raised. All of this puts more pressure on those young people from abroad. They carry the hopes of their families for a better life, but often find frustration, isolation, and even outright rip-offs. Last season, Salima Shivji showed us many students arrive here to find a reality far different from the dream they were sold.
The billboards are everywhere, inescapable, crammed into every corner of this square in India's Punjab state, screaming out the new immigrant dream. Inside one of the countless education consultant firms, a steady bustle, potential students with their sights set on Canada.
My visa letter, that visa is granted.
At home, 19-year-old Banti gets his papers in order. His childhood dream to study in Canada is days from coming true.
I think that life becomes better and it's easy for my, and I like to get my parents to their new country. So that's why Canada.
But his excitement is tempered by nerves, thinking about the younger sister and parents he'll leave behind.
It is a tough that to leave our family here, but we need to sacrifice something to get something.
It's hard to quantify the sacrifices. Bunty's father, Kuldeep, works 18-hour days as a tailor, saving every penny, and still he had to borrow from family and friends to send his son abroad. I feel tense and worried, he says. I've worked so hard. I hope it's worth it. I hope my son will do well. It's a dream for many here in rural Punjab, where a student visa is seen as a way out of this life, a chance for a brighter future. Tens of thousands of Indians head to Canada every year, and the number keeps growing. It's big business, selling a path to permanent residency, which is what the vast majority of students want, this education consultant says.
So their first question is, before asking which course they want to go, before asking which university is the best for them, so the first question is that whether I will get a permanent residency or not.
With the crush of people wanting to study abroad and the maze of education consultant companies in an industry this big, there are also sub-agents, students say, who use shady practices, faking documents, pushing students to the wrong schools, telling students they owe more in tuition and fees, only to pocket the rest.
These students, all at different stages of the application process to study in Canada, have heard the horror stories.
So many people are fake and cheat with the people.
They are spoiling many people's life, I think, because many people from poor family are funding them.
The main issue, a lack of oversight. Agents get commissions from both public and private colleges in Canada, which want the massive sums foreign students bring in.
There is no regulation in India, so everyone who wants to run an immigration business, he or she can run an immigration business. So everybody is getting his or her share.
After 21 years of guiding Punjabi students to colleges abroad, Sarabjit Singh says these days the game has changed.
They don't see the student is eligible for the visa or not. They just take the money.
With sketchy agents looking to make a quick buck.
Canada
He also says Canada falls short compared to countries like Australia in policing the quality of education some private colleges are offering. And the pain falls on the students, far from home and vulnerable. There has been some effort to monitor the schools. In late 2020, Quebec briefly suspended 10 colleges to investigate questionable recruiting practices and found shortcomings. Several of the schools later filed for creditor protection, and students reported being pressured to pay their tuition fast.
So they don't want to tell anyone about their problem.
Stories like that are endlessly frustrating for Gurpreet Malhotra, who runs a community group in the Peel region outside Toronto.
How dare you squeeze the hopes and dreams of a young person into your bottom line to support the inefficiencies of the rest of your system?
He sees a blatant cash grab that compounds the stress on students navigating a new life, often in tiny, cramped apartments.
Between the federal and provincial governments, the system has been set up with enough wide gaps between them that people are falling through.
Malhotra's group works mainly in Brampton, a hotspot, with a cluster of dozens of colleges tightly packed into strip malls. The acute stress on students leaves many desolate. It proved too much for Lovepreet Singh. The 20-year-old jumped in front of a train last April after 3 years in Canada, leaving his family back home unconsolable. We're destroyed, his mother says. Somehow we pass the time. His father is at a loss to understand. We spoke daily, he says, but Lovepreet never told us anything was wrong. This is all they have left. The family sold their few acres of land to pay for their son's studies and borrowed heavily to keep sending him more and more money. Their dreams of a better life now shattered. Half a world away in Brampton, Bunty, starting afresh, knows his parents are also counting on him. He sits with family friends, leans on them for support. His first weeks in Canada have been overwhelming, and he's struggling to adjust.
I didn't know many people here, and in India, we usually become free and we do not have any stress, but here we need to manage everything with ourselves.
He's trying not to miss classes, trying to find a job, and navigate the stress of a life in Canada that's cold and lonely for so many. It took some time, but Bunty did settle in. He is still in Brampton, and he just sat his last exams to complete his IT course. He has a job not directly connected to his studies, but it is work, and he is applying to get a work permit to stay in Canada. Bunty's plan is still to get permanent residency and to help his younger sister also settle in Canada.
And Salima, what role has the housing crunch played?
Well, the number of Indian students just keeps going up, and dramatically. 320,000 last year. That's a 46% increase in just 3 years. And for many of them, finding decent housing is a huge issue, even though many advocates say that the housing challenges in Canada have far more to do with other reasons than international students. As for those scams and dishonest practices that the young people are dealing with, Ottawa is trying to crack down, but it is an uphill battle.
Salima Shivji in Mumbai. Coming up, a traffic stop that is anything but ordinary.
It never ceases to amaze me the things that I've ran into while doing this job.
The big surprise in a small sedan. Next. Yeah, you're looking at a bull riding shotgun and the driver pulled over by Nebraska police. Amazingly, the enormous animal was able to fit in a regular-sized sedan, and the driver was let go with just a warning. The bizarre bovine passenger is our moment.
Well, it was obviously quite a spectacle. The call came out as a cow that was in a car. The officer found it easily enough. It's not like it blended in with the rest of traffic, as you can imagine. I guess the assumption was that it was a small calf or something smaller that would actually fit in a car. I believe its name is Howdy Doody. It was an African cow, a Watusi. It had to have been between 1,500 pounds and a ton. He had the passenger side of the vehicle cut from the windshield all the way back to the rear window. The officer had addressed some of the violations with him. He was given a warning for some of those violations, and so we asked him to take it home, and he did. It never ceases to amaze me the things that I've ran into while doing this job. You could chalk it up there in the top 10, I suspect.
I mean, like, I'm kind of at a loss to even know how to react to this, other than to say, and I've learned over the years, you got to be careful about making broad declarations, but I feel like in the long history of cattle farming and ranching in this country, no one has ever put an adult cow in the passenger seat of their car. If I'm wrong, you know how to reach me. That is The National for August 31st. Have a good night.